Many people seem to think that government is some opponent of corporate agendas, as if less government would lead to more corporate power, as if government is a buffer that holds corporations back. The evidence clearly shows it is exactly the opposite. Government is the eager and willing enforcer and promoter of corporate agendas. Government is the means by which wealthy corporations push to new levels of monopoly and control. With laws that discourage competition, protect corporate plunder and exploitation globally, obstruct entry to the markets by competitors, provide massive subsidies, bailouts, and immunities for all kinds of major industrial enterprises, to the blatant naming of corporations in favorable legislation. Government is an essential partner and promoter of large-scale corporate agendas, taking corporations far beyond the potential wealth and influence that would ever be possible without government collusion. For instance, why else would government even think of allowing GMO food development? Pesticides are woven into the DNA of the foods we eat. As if that will not be harmful to the public, that is nothing but a major sellout by your elected officials. And wireless technologies, one of the most profitable corporate enterprises of the century, are being permitted to the point where our environments are now flooded with thousands of times the radio frequency pollution than are recommended even by government. But government does nothing to track and control that pollution, while EMR-sensitive people are getting ill by the millions. Government no longer has time or interest for public service. There is money to be made. The perfect example of government force promoting corporate agendas is the military. Virtually everything our nation's military has done since 1945 has been primarily to benefit some corporate interest in one way or another. The power to create and enforce legislation resides in government, and for centuries it has been for sale to the highest bidder. So for the top corporations, securing government enforcement is just another routine task. That corporate department called regulatory compliance is probably more accurately named regulatory advantage over the competition. The regulations are often proposed by the corporations themselves as a means to choke competition. And your elected officials then step up to the microphone and tell us it's good for the economy or it's good for the consumer as they button their jackets over fat envelopes full of money. Even the stock markets have been lost to private control. Directly or indirectly, government agencies now own and control over 70% of all equities on the stock markets. Government controls the stock markets. Rather than use its vast wealth to provide services or return surpluses to you, it has bought up the nation's corporate equities for itself. Private investors like you and I own less than 30% of all equities, all the stocks in the stock market. Compared to government, everyone else are bit players in national finance. Government now owns so much private wealth and collects so much interest and dividends that government now collects 2/3 of its revenues from corporate investments, not from taxes. Government is the largest investor in the companies it is supposed to be regulating. How do you regulate a company when you are sharing in its profits? So government power and wealth is corporate power and wealth. There is no longer any separation of any kind between corporate and government agendas. When government provides a privilege to a corporation, government benefits as an investor directly, financially, from granting that privilege. As a corporate investor, government directly profits from the laws it passes. There could not be a more corrupt incentive or moral hazard. Whenever government faces the choice of corporate service or public service, it will always choose corporate service if the corporation is large, wealthy, and in the government's investment portfolio. This problem with government is not subject to reform. It is systemic, entrenched, and carved in stone in the form of hundreds of thousands of laws and regulations. It is the way government functions and avoids bankruptcy. After generations of irresponsible fiscal mismanagement, government as we know it can no longer be sustained without the corporate partnerships. Many of us wonder why, when government is supposed to be serving us It simply seems to treat us as a revenue source, and government decisions seem to always go to the advantage and power of corporations, no matter how loud the public outcry or the protest is. Well, now you know why. Corporate power will never be reduced until government power, force, wealth, and statutory volume is reduced. In order to reduce corporate power, our legislators will have to go through each of our laws, one by one, and pick out the parts that grant advantage, subsidy, immunity, authority, and monopoly to corporations, and they will have to strike every word of that. Our statutes are literally saturated and littered with that garbage. Legislation can be bought for the cost of a weekend vacation. And then government will have to divest itself of its special and secret investment accounts that tie its agendas with corporations. But even that's not enough. We will have to examine every contract between the private and public sectors. We'll have to find and examine every relationship between policymakers and every lobbyist, influence peddler, and non-government organization. We are far behind. In fact, we have now completely lost the war of keeping corporate influence out of government. That is why some people say we just have to have less government. It's the only apparent remaining solution. Our legislators are not going to stop playing their corrupt games and take a meat axe to corporate-sponsored legislation. It is clear that reform by democratic process is no longer possible, if it ever was. So the idea that government is good and corporations are bad is nothing more than a dangerous delusion. They are now both embedded elements of a fully integrated racket that feeds as a parasite from the earnings, wealth, assets, and opportunities of every American. When people are demonizing corporations, they often demonize the word capitalism. Don't make the mistake of using the word capitalism to describe anything going on today. Capitalism is entrepreneurship that is unassisted and unhindered by government. You can no longer develop any enterprise without being required to engage all kinds of relationships with government as regulator, licensor, permitter, taxing agent, and beggar for political contributions. And government no longer acts without considering the revenue potential of its actions. That thing called profit in corporations is called revenue in government. Don't be fooled. They are the same thing, and government is a for-profit operation. If you are trying to start or run a business, and you're not ready to partner with government, to pay permits, fees, and taxes, to open your records to government, to comply with whatever they call a regulation, you are literally prohibited from participating in commerce. That means that capitalism and free enterprise do not exist. The free market is not there. The market only receives what the filters of government allow through, and the filters are now dense and many. We cannot claim that capitalism is a problem when it does not even exist according to its definition. True capitalists operate on their reputations. When government protects and enforces your crimes, you don't need to worry about your reputation. If any enterprise succeeds today, it means they have willingly formed that partnership with government. They have paid their extortion monies. They have bowed down to the great bureaucrats. They have done things the government way, and government has once again become the non-producing beneficiary of our productivity. Government will never protect you from corporate evil. Government is the greatest benefactor of that evil. Government is the facilitator, protector, enforcer of corporate agendas to its own profit and power. It is simple force and extortion. Government is not the highway. Government is the toll gate. Since there is no distinction between government power and corporate power, the choice, your choice, is collective power versus your personal freedoms, rights, and opportunities. Institutional power against your self-determination. Government-enforced corporate agenda versus your access to participation in commerce and freedom to keep what you earn, to look after yourself and be responsible for your actions in an open and free marketplace. If the idea of looking after yourself seems scary or difficult, just consider that the government institutions and agencies that tell you they are looking after you are doing something very different. There's a reason you're not invited to go browse through government offices and listen in on their conversations. They are not serving. They are controlling and profiting. They are protecting monopolies. They are consolidating their power with corporations that dominate your life. If it weren't for government control, you could start a telephone company tomorrow with $100. And you probably wouldn't allow it to become a surveillance resource for government. You could start a bank tomorrow for $100, and your bank would probably be far more honest than the banks we now have. It is government that prevents you from doing those things. It is government that tells you how and when you can be a bank or a phone company. No corporation has the power to prevent you from opening a bank. Only government can do that. So look at what happens. When one of those big banks that is partnered with government decides to plunder the nation in a land grab, and their press releases call it a foreclosure crisis, it is government that lets the families be thrown out of their homes while they bail out the banks, even while those banks sit on all that collateral and their huge insurance policies. There was a time when government would have protected the families and let the banks look after themselves. We need to reestablish that ethic and purpose in government. Why does it seem so impossible for you to create your own job, start your own business? It's because government makes that so hard. If you are self-sufficient, if you are independent, you are a threat to government control and collective power. You are to be a worker drone for the big boys. The fruits of your labor are to be taken from you and spread among the corporations and governments. You are to be dependent, controlled, exploited, and plundered. Government knows that you can be productive, and they want to take what you produce. They are now very good at that. We need to change that. We need to be more self-sufficient. We all need to realize that if government is not helping us, then government is just in the way. Because if things get bad, it will not be a government agency that will save you. As they often admit, they will be busy saving themselves. They call it continuity of government. Exactly why do we need continuity of an enforcer, bully, and hitman that serves corporate agendas? Why do we need continuity of a government that has lost its sense of duty to the public interest? Why do we need continuity of government that says it no longer needs to consider the Constitution from which it derives its authority? If government is not ours to control, it is not our government. It refuses to serve. It cannot be reformed. So at this point, for any freedom to be restored, every one of us, in one way or another, needs to make government get out of our way. That is our job. Government will not do that for us.